So while the legal system often fails to protect women who defend themselves against abuse, the cultural system frequently punishes them for simply telling the truth. The case of Megan Thee Stallion is frankly emblematic of this very idea. In 2020, Megan was shot in the foot by fellow rapper Tory Lanez following an argument. Now, what followed was not just a criminal trial, but a cultural trial as well. Megan was publicly ridiculed, accused of lying, and vilified all across social media, even as physical evidence, even as eyewitness evidence corroborated her account. Now, her experience exemplifies really a broader societal tendency to disbelieve, to silence, or to punish Black women survivors. The courtroom may offer legal justice, as it did when Tory Lanez was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But Megan's journey, that revealed something deeper. It revealed the high cost of being a Black woman who dares to name her harm. Two attorneys who played lead roles representing Meg Thee Stallion are joining me now. Marie Hayrapetian, an associate at Quinn, Emmanuel in Los Angeles. We're going to welcome her to the stage. Prior to joining her firm, Quinn Emmanuel, she clerked for the LA District Attorney's Office in its hardcore gang unit. Welcome. Also joining us is Janet Shamilian, who is an associate as well at Quinn Emmanuel's Los Angeles office, and her practice focuses on complex commercial litigation. Welcome to Marie, and also Janet, come on out. Thank you. Thank you. For those who may have been familiar with the events I've just briefly described, but don't know nearly the details that either of you know, and the experience as having been counsel in these matters, I wonder if you could just go through a little bit, both of you. What were the events that led to this shooting and ultimately really the vilifying of Meg Thee Stallion? Tell me.
So first, we're so happy to be here. And in response to your question, the events occurred on July 12 of 2020. Miss Pete, Mr. Peterson, and Miss Harris, Miss Pete's then friend, were attending a social gathering together in Los Angeles, California. One thing led to another. They left the gathering together, and they were being driven by Mr. Peterson's driver, Jaquan Smith. And an altercation occurred, just a verbal altercation between those that were in the car, which led Miss Pete to exit the vehicle. And at that point, Mr. Peterson discharged a firearm and shot 5 rounds at Miss Pete, striking her in both her feet. Obviously, this was an incredibly traumatic experience for Miss Pete. Thereafter, they re-entered the vehicle, and moments later, they were pulled over on a very public street in Los Angeles on Hollywood Boulevard, and helicopters were swarming above, guns were drawn at everyone, and they were ordered to exit the vehicle and put their hands up. And in response to the second part of your question regarding the vilification of Miss Pete, given how traumatic this experience was, she had just been shot by someone she considered close, someone she considered a friend. She was in pain, bleeding, limping, and ordered to exit a vehicle with police officers giving her orders at a time where this was only months after the murder of George Floyd. So this was a heightened, very, very scary situation. And when the police officers approached her, in order to protect herself and everyone else, as a Black woman, as a person of color, she represented that she had stepped in glass. And that representation was blown out of proportion and used as a basis to really highlight societal biases against women, against people of color, and to magnify that and claim, see, she was dishonest, she misrepresented the circumstances under her injury.
Oh my God. How soon after that occurred did you begin to work with her?
So This case was brought by the people of the state of California, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, and they filed charges shortly thereafter, I believe in October of 2020, and we represent Meg on the civil side. But I was present in court every single day as the trial was occurring, and I witnessed the testimony of all witnesses, both on the prosecution and defense side. So we had a presence, but of course we were deferring to the prosecution that brought this case against Mr. Peterson.
When you look at, and instantly people's ears go up when they think about civil versus criminal, and there is a real stigma, it seems, when people are pursuing civil matters. People will almost vilify in and of itself and suggest that there's some ulterior motive that you want to bring a civil suit, as opposed to what you have described. Did Meg understand what she was entering into with this attention in this case?
I think it's hard for any victim of violence to understand, A, what's happening to them in the moment, and B, what they're about to face. What we've seen in this case is Meg was a victim of a violent crime. She protected her abuser, which we commonly see with victims of domestic violence. That's the number one question, right? Why did they stay? Why did they protect their abuser? And naturally, Meg wanted to do that. And as we just discussed, the climate of police brutality was such that she felt compelled to protect all of the people around her that day. Then she had to come forward because she was being scrutinized by Mr. Peterson constantly in the media. She spoke the truth, her truth, and she's been vilified ever since. She participated, cooperated with the district attorney, and if there was a criminal prosecution, that trial ended over 2 years ago, and we are still hearing about everything that happened to Meg and the lies percolating every few months. Up until last night, she has to constantly be re-victimized and re-traumatized and relive that moment. And yes, as citizens of the United States, we have the liberty to use both the criminal justice system and the civil court system. And everyone is entitled to use both of those systems, which are extremely robust systems. They have checks and balances. So the criminal case had 12 jurors of Mr. Peterson's peers that were able to evaluate the evidence, both while the trial was going on and back in the jury room. So there's definitely conversations that happen in front of the lawyers and the judge. There's conversations that happen back in chambers. There are conversations no one is really witness to, but that is by virtue, the legal system, and we need to allow it to operate. And it did operate. The system worked. 12 people unanimously found Mr. Peterson guilty.
What is so, as you talk about the re-traumatization and the re-victimization, it has been relentless. I mean, I talk about the misogynoir. I mean, the idea of her being vilified for speaking up, it was almost as if people were suggesting that she was supposed to follow some code, and she wasn't allowed to talk about having been shot in her feet, that she was a victim in this way. It was that she was judged in a very different realm, maybe in part the celebrity status, but also as a woman and as a Black woman. It was as if she was taking so much incoming from the court of public opinion. I often wondered about her mental sanity and her peace. That must have been debilitating.
It was, and you couldn't be more correct. I mean, Mr. Peterson was on trial in the court of justice, but it seems like Miss P is on trial in the court of public opinion.
Why is that, though?
Initially, it started, people harped onto the fact that she misrepresented that she stepped on glass, but that has been dispelled. It's well established that Miss Pete was shot in both her feet. There are medical records that corroborate this from Cedars-Sinai, an independent entity disinterested in the outcome of this case. And yet, we had physicians that testified on the stand who were present and operated and removed bullet fragments from Miss Pete's feet. And yet there are still people today, after Mr. Peterson was convicted, who question whether she was shot. It was admitted into evidence, and the jury considered it in rendering their verdict. You can't just admit information and documents into evidence. There is a very robust process by which a document is authenticated and then accepted into evidence. And the medical records, Ms. Pete's testimony, eyewitness testimony corroborated the fact that she was shot.
And of course, you're doing your due diligence as civil attorneys as well before accepting a case to make sure that you can represent in the way that would get the result that your client needs, even if it means protecting them through the process, which people don't realize the assistance needed to navigate a criminal process is overwhelming.
Absolutely, and in this case, the evidence was overwhelming. As Marie said, 12 disinterested, unidentified individuals found Mr. Peterson guilty of 3 felony counts. What Mr. Peterson is now trying to do is re-victimize Ms. Pete. 5 years after the incident, 2.5 years after the trial, we are here talking about this case, and it caused Ms. Pete a great deal of trauma when she was experiencing this live, because it was almost like she had to justify her trauma to the public. And this isn't how we want to treat victims. She had to justify that she was shot. She has to she's put in a position where she wants to respond and validate and reinforce the verdict.
The unfairness of that is unbelievable, and really is emblematic of why many people choose not to come forward. And that is so problematic given the fact that with the platform that she unexpectedly had based on this, she has really become an illustration, maybe for people, of why to come forward and stay strong in spite. But I suspect she has carried with her this thought of, was it worth it?
That's absolutely right. And this is a very important, significant moment for the world. If we do not allow Miss Pete an opportunity to heal and accept the verdict, we are setting a dangerous precedent for the women in the future. Black women, women of color, minorities, it is extremely dangerous because we are telling women, we are causing a chilling effect and allowing them to hide behind the abuse that they face, and that is really dangerous.
I'm especially struck by the consideration that Meg had when it came to the killing of George Floyd. And I just want to underscore the point, how I interpreted what you're saying, that by her talking about having stepped on glass was in part to protect a Black man in the car from having an overzealous and harmful police officer harm that person. And then that entered in a different layer in the way in which the criticism for her going forward moved to the surface. And that was, well, how dare she, I've read this, how dare she jeopardize the safety and freedom of a Black man in America, as if she was not victimized and harmed by that person as well, according to what the jury has said. Talk to us about that tension that she struggled with and has been reflected on, knowing how aware she is about the dynamic of police and people of color, and yet her desire and her earned worth to be able to protect herself.
I think it says a lot that Miss Pete's knee-jerk reaction was to immediately resort to protection for everyone there, despite what had happened to her moments before. It illustrates her character, and she was very public about the fact that she did not intend to publicize this incident. She was very vocal about the fact that she initially intended to handle this privately, and that is consistent in the representation she made, as you said, to protect Mr. Peterson, to protect everyone, because the issues that you discussed with what was occurring with police brutality, with George Floyd, these were very, very real issues that she was genuinely very harmed by. She made those representations, and as I said, they were dispelled. It's well established that she was shot, but people are harping on that, and I think that is illustrative of societal biases we have against women, because it's clear why she made that representation in the time that she did. We have to take a step back and consider the trauma that she was in. It's a moment's notice. Police officers are approaching you. You are scared, understandably, especially given what's going on in the country. And she wanted to protect herself, others, and she became not just a victim, but she was called a liar, subjected to vitriol and hate and emotional turmoil for protecting others.
Let's talk about the platform on which a lot of that vitriol occurred, social media. Describe the role that that has played in amplifying the court of public opinion and the misguided, I'm being generous when I say misguided, the misguided ideas that called into question repeatedly her credibility.
You stated that very delicately. Social media is an extremely dangerous tool. It could be great, but it could be extremely harmful. What we've seen in this case is Mr. Peterson use paid for bloggers, social media personalities to violate protective orders and gag orders he's under. So we have social media personalities
And the court has found that, right, and it matters.
It is currently being litigated in a civil lawsuit we are actually handling, and we have shown the court evidence of such issues, but it's extremely dangerous because social media has blown it completely out of proportion. They are expecting a perfect victim, and no such thing exists because no perfect person exists. And it goes back to the chilling effect. You are not allowing victims a space to come forward if the automatic reaction is, oh, she's lying. Oh, it was glass. There's no gun. She was never shot. Oh, but the gun is missing and we can't test it for DNA. But then you have someone from the LAPD office signing a verified declaration in October 2024 saying that the firearm, bullet casings, bullet fragments, and the magazine are all in protective custody.
I mean, imagine if this is somebody who has an extraordinary fan base for very obvious reasons, and yet the trouble that she has had in navigating the public eye in this arena has been jarring to so many people who are afraid, frankly, terrified. If looking at her as an example, the role of social media in particular as well to the mental health of the person after they have had their quote-unquote day in court cannot be overstated. Describe this parallel universe where you got the justice system on the one hand to protect or right a wrong, and yet feeling whole and complete when you've got the overwhelming attacks that are happening in a very different arena.
So Ms. P was on trial in the court of public opinion, and in fact, after the verdict was rendered in December of 2022, that vitriol that she was subjected to only intensified. What's interesting is, having witnessed the entire trial, in the United States, we follow the fundamental principle that you are innocent until proven guilty. In this circumstance, Mr. Peterson is presumed innocent even after having been proven guilty. And Ms. P continues to have to defend herself. And it's really the social media that people spreading disinformation, taking information from sources that are not credible, not questioning the message that they are putting out. And of course, you publish something on social media, people are running with it. There's no fact-checking basis. People were not in court. Many times I was in trial witnessing the evidence being presented. I would go home, sign on, look at social media, and what was being reported was starkly different than what I personally witnessed in court. The DNA evidence, for example, this is a prime example. Criminalists, DNA experts testified that it was inconclusive whether Mr. Peterson's DNA was on the firearm. That was spun to, oh, Mr. Peterson, his DNA is excluded. Inconclusive was deliberately misrepresented as excluded. Those are two very different legal concepts, but if you don't question and think critically and logically, I could see how those two concepts can be conflated in public opinion, and that's exactly what happened. Never mind that the gun was found on the floorboard, warm to touch of where he was seated. Never mind that he had gunshot residue. Never mind that DNA experts said 90% chance a woman could not have been the shooter, which is what he purported, his trial theme, that the friend was the shooter. Never mind all of that. All people are focusing on is, oh, he was excluded. Completely false.
She was also vilified for having the audacity to show emotion. And this harkens back to a number of issues that women of color are faced with, whether it's the healthcare system or in everyday life, where there is the expectation of a stoic nature. And anything less means weakness, but not just weakness. It means that you can't be believed. She had no right to show emotion, it seemed, that somehow was taken and used against her in ways that it would not have been had she been a white woman.
That's absolutely right. And it's fascinating because whether Miss Pete speaks or doesn't speak, she's criticized. So she spoke a few weeks ago when she had had enough of hearing back and forth about new evidence, which, by the way, none of it is new. Even yesterday on the flight over, there was a PowerPoint presentation released with new evidence. Not one item is new, and Janet can vouch for it sitting in the courtroom. All of those items were considered in court. And Miss Pete would not have to face this scrutiny if she was not a celebrity, if she was a white woman, and it's extremely unjust and extremely unfair. And it's just time for everyone to respect the verdict, allow the appellate process to do its thing, and let Miss Pete heal.
So how do you, talk to us about how you combated some of what was going on? Because obviously, as you describe the vitriol and the amplification on social media, you had to essentially have a response and use the weapons that were formed against you to then allow her to prosper. How?
Well, the verdict speaks for itself, and I think going back to what I said, it's really important to think logically here. To believe Mr. Peterson's perspective, you have to believe that an independent institution, a reputable institution like Cedars-Sinai, has falsified medical records. Physicians that were present and operating on Miss Pete have falsified medical records, are falsely claiming that they extracted foreign metallic bodies, bullet fragments from her feet. You have to believe that everyone who testified on behalf of the prosecution was lying, under oath, subjecting themselves to the grueling process of cross-examination. And more concerning, you have to believe that 12 disinterested individuals somehow rendered a verdict just to support and protect Miss Pete. And to be clear, we're not representing that the justice system always gets it right. That's absolutely not true. We would be foolish to make such a representation. In fact, we heard from panelists who had a very different experience. Our representation is that the justice system in this case got it right, and the jury got it right. Mr. Peterson is guilty.
But the problem is, Miss Pete, Megan Thee Stallion, has also been deemed guilty. Of what crime, I'm not quite sure. But in the court of public opinion, the ridicule, the hatred, the vitriol has condemned her. And how do you see society getting to the point where you have described, both of you, where the victim of a crime receives sympathy, healthy scrutiny, which is always healthy in a system where we believe that people have to assess credibility, but sympathy, not the condemnation. What gets us to that point? Are we talking having to overcome sexism, misogyny? Is that the only way, or is there a way to consider how we can get there faster?
I think if everyone really challenged their own thoughts took a look at their own biases and asked, why do I feel compelled after a 12-person unanimous guilty verdict to go on social media and post that the victim should be arrested and put in jail when she was the victim of a brutal attack, gun violence? You have to ask yourself, what have I learned growing up to allow me to jump to this conclusion, and really challenge your own thoughts, or pay attention to the social media content you're consuming. Is it coming from a lawyer? Is it coming from someone who sat through the entire trial, has a legal degree, and understands the material they heard? Were those people behind the scenes with the judge in chambers? Do they understand why a certain witness did not testify? There are so many checks and balances. There are things beyond what the common public understands, and it's really important to use cognitive reasoning skills and evaluate things for yourself before you jump on social media and harass people who are victims of crimes.
And just in addition to that, with Miss Pete's specific circumstance, we saw media bloggers, content moderators, and including A-list celebrities, even before the evidence was in, before the trial, take a side, which clearly was premature and incorrect. And so I think, as Marie said, what can we do to combat these biases? In addition to what's been stated, I think we need to consider, who are we supporting? Are we supporting the people that are perpetuating the stereotypes that we wish to break? Multiple males came out and spoke against Miss Pete, her peers, rappers, attacking her, and again, discrediting her and her experience. We have to ask ourselves, who do we support? We are the individuals that choose who we make famous, that give them this platform. We want to amplify the voice of a victim who has been proven to be the victim in court, and not the people that are questioning her experience, even after the rendering of the verdict.
It occurs to me you are challenging hypocrisy in so many words. And it is one where we see in nearly every facet of our lives. Is Megan safe? Does she feel safe?
How could you feel safe when you're being attacked left, right, and around the corner, even when the criminal justice system has declared you a victim? Every aspect of her life includes public scrutiny. Every time she opens her phone, she gets to see the terrible things people are saying about her. And it's so dangerous as a woman, as a Black woman, a minority woman, to feel like you are not safe in your own body, in the state you live in the country you live in, where laws were made to protect you.
Having your truth render you unsafe is terrifying. And again, I look at what has happened in her experience as really a microcosm of what we're seeing across society. I mean, we're talking about Ms. Pete. I think we're also hearing, though, about the thought process and considerations of women of all socioeconomic statuses, of all celebrity statuses. Most people are not famous, have no idea who one another are. And yet there is a common thread you have described. So I ask you, when you're looking at this, and you think about what can be done in terms of maybe legislatively to protect, or issues in terms of how the criminal justice system could possibly do more. Oftentimes when there's a trial, there is that protective order in place. Civilly, there's a protective order in place. Are there gaps that you have now become aware of based on your experience in this case?
Definitely. I think one specific thing that happened with the trial is, after the verdict was rendered, Ms. P, the protective order in the case had expired, which gave Mr. Peterson technically the right to comment on the case, to spread disinformation on the case, to employ surrogates to spread his message while he is locked up behind bars. He is still continuing the harassment by way of third parties, even after he has been sentenced and convicted. And so we had to go in and actually get a civil harassment restraining order on Ms. Pete's behalf because of the fact that the protective order did not continue after the end of the criminal trial. Ms. Pete did get the civil harassment restraining order, but to your question, if she feels safe, it's still insufficient because harassment can look different, and it's different. It could be physical, it could be verbal. And while Mr. Peterson is in prison, there are other individuals that are subjecting her to harassment that is arguably as painful and as hurtful as the gunshot wounds she sustained in 2020. It just continues.
And what you've described are things that are transferable to an everyday case, so to speak, considering what you're talking about, the insights you've learned. This is not specific to a celebrity matter. This is what can be navigated today.
Absolutely, and we work on cases like this all the time. And you have to ask yourself, if a celebrity with the reputation and status of Miss Pete is not safe, what is the regular woman doing? And how safe is she in her own home? And how willing is she to come forward and tell people who her abuser is? What tools does a regular person have to take care of their mental health, their physical health?
And defamation is, of course, an avenue on the civil side, and it protects disinformation from being spread. And so really there is a fine balance between free speech and defamation, and that's what we see at play now with everyone commenting on this case and spreading the smear campaign that Mr. Peterson is spearheading.
What I take away fundamentally, too, is that self-examination and reflection on what society we want to live in and what role we might play, inadvertently or consciously, in perpetuating and undermining exactly what we want to achieve. Thank you both so much for illuminating this. Really, really powerful and compelling. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Wow. I want to thank all of our audience as well for listening to this Spotlight conversation. So important to hear about what is happening. And I hope that you will genuinely take the insights that you've learned. This is applicable, not just in this case, but it's applicable, and it takes resources as well. The resources can be tangible or otherwise, but it takes that information resource that is the most powerful of all. So thank you for illuminating. Thank you so much.